Welcome, everybody. This is the Autism Healing Intention Teleseminar. And so for those of you who don't already know, my name is Suzy Miller, and I'm working with Dr. William Tiller on this project, and we'd like to share today a little bit of information. We want to cover various topics to orient you to this program, and we'd also like to open this up for questions towards the end of the information that we're going to share today. But if you'll please hold any questions until the end, after we've had a little bit of a conversation, that'll be really helpful both for the recording and just for the continuity of the information that we'll be providing. Everybody, if you have not already pushed star 6, if you'll do that, that would be wonderful. Again, you'll be able to unmute yourself by pushing star 6 again towards the end of this call when we open it up for questions. We want to cover a few different things and kind of give you a picture of, number one, why this program was created, what's kind of currently happening in the program that we've been running since last December. We want to give you a little bit of information about the science related to this and how we believe this is working. And also talk to you about your participation in this process, because this is absolutely a co-creative endeavor from the minute you really express an interest in this process and as we move forward. So the first piece of this is that, this program was conceived probably about a year and a half ago now at this point, a little over a year and a half ago, as far as Dr. Tiller and I are concerned. But it was conceived within the consciousness of the children long before that. My skill set is such that I've been in connection and communication with the consciousness of children both diagnosed with autism and those who you might consider to be energetically sensitive but not necessarily have that diagnosis. And I've been hearing for literally the last 10 years that the integration process, the ability of these children to be more fully present in their physical experience, would become more and more available over time. I had also heard that at some point in history that there would be someone who would come along that would make this this opportunity for the children not just possible but probable. And so when I met Dr. Tiller, a little over a year and a half ago now, and we began to kind of discuss who I believe these children to be, why I believe they are having challenges being here at this time, and also began to discuss with him, what he had been doing for the last, 40 plus years around intention. It was very clear to us that, there could be some type of collaboration, and that collaboration could possibly allow children who were having a very challenging time functioning in this time and space, functioning in this type of kind of physical reality, to actually be able to condition the space so that it would be a little easier for them to be here, for them to show up in new ways. So we began to have this conversation. And one of the conversations that was also very important is that with my work with the children, I have always heard and adhered to the fact that nothing can or should be done on behalf of another, individual without it being according to their soul's purpose. And so when that's kind of part of the intention, that children be able to integrate according to their soul's purpose, that was really important to me. And when I began to talk with Dr. Tiller about, this program and what we might be able to do together, one of the very first things he said to me was, again, the intention would be that this would be done according to their soul's purpose. So again, no one is being coerced or forced or any of those kinds of things to be present here at this time. But one of the other things that I have really witnessed in all of my work with the children over the years is that when we create the appropriate environment, the energetic environment, the emotional environment, the mental environment, the physical environment, when we create the appropriate environment, these children do show up, and they show up in some of the most magnificent ways, and they show up with some very interesting awarenesses and information. So the conception of this program that you're hearing about today really is a co-creation, not just between Dr. Tiller and myself, but also what I believe is the consciousness of the children, and also your intentions, your consciousness as well, because each new participant that comes to this process adds something very significant to it as well. So I want to talk to you also a little bit about this whole idea of, what allows something like this to occur, what allows a space to be changed so that it is a space that holds a higher vibrational frequency. And I'm going to ask, Dr. Tiller to talk to you about that science and about what actually allows this to happen. But again, one of the things that feels very important is if we can conceive or believe that a lot of these children are simply having challenges being here because there is a vibrational mismatch between who they are and who they have come here to be and the environments that they find themselves in, not just their household environments, but more the environment or the space of the current human condition. So I'd like, Bill, could you talk a little bit about the science of this, how this actually happens, how you actually condition a space?
Okay. Please pull my chain if I talk too much.
I will. Thank you.
Okay. I think the first thing that people have to realize is that we are all souls that are evolving via processes of experience. And for souls to enter this distance-time realm of nature, they need a bio-body suit through which they can interface and experience that domain. That's kind of important for people to get. The experience that we have some familiarity with is those who go deep, deep, deep within the ocean to look at the environment. They have to have a diving bell. That is the interface between them and the environment in that domain where there are new parameters which requires such a vehicle. I'm saying, we can go back now a step, that in order to experience this domain, we have to have an interface. And in my model, there are two layers to that interface, one of which is invisible, because the phenomena causing it to work go faster than our electromagnetic light, and therefore are not our tools, which are all based, at this point in time, largely upon electromagnetism. The limiting signal velocity there is the velocity of electromagnetic light going through physical vacuum. A very big number. We don't need to worry about the number, but that is a clear limitation. And nature is much, much more than just distance time. We all collectively happen to be functioning in distance time. The outermost layer of the bio-body suit is an electric atom molecule vehicle that we wear and that we put on when we are born and we shuck off when we leave this domain. the innermost layer, which now connects with the higher dimensional aspects of the universe and the aspects of our soul self, is a domain which I call is a template upon which the electric atom molecule, visible body, forms. Okay, this is sort of all theoretical stuff, but it's important to say something about it. When I started doing this kind of work in parallel with my orthodox science at Stanford University, was back in 1970. Before that, I became a daily meditator with my wife for about 10 years before that event started in the 1970s. And the first, not quite 20 years, but almost 20 years, was doing experiments to prove to myself that this crazy-seeming kind of stuff was real, and it was important, terribly important for humanity's evolvement. And then I met a philanthropist who provided 3 years of financial support, and it was substantial financial support. This was 1997. It's when my first book came out, based upon the first period where I was convincing myself there really was something important here. And with that funding, I decided to test the unstated assumption of science since the 1600s, which came from Descartes, who, in order to function in that world, remember a century before was the transition between the theocratic paradigm and the beginnings of the science paradigm. Descartes, even a century later, people were still very much connected to the old theocratic paradigm. The work of Galileo and Kepler and Copernicus and Newton showed that the theocratic assumptions were not correct. But people have hangovers with paradigms. When I say hangovers, I mean they can last for centuries. And so the unstated assumption of science, which was useful in that day by Descartes, he said, let us assume that no human qualities of consciousness, intention, emotion, mind, or spirit can significantly influence a well-designed target experiment in physical reality. So that allowed, if people adhered to that assumption, it allowed them to separate religion from science. It was very useful in those days. It's not useful today, but it hadn't been seriously tested when I had received these funds for a 3-year program. And by that time I had learned how to imprint a specific intention into a little black electronic box. The technology of that box was the kind of thing you could get at Radio Shack, all the pieces, back in the mid-1950s. So it was pretty simple. So the black box was a vehicle, but it had to be imprinted, and the imprinting was done from a deep meditative state, initially by 4 people. We've done it with 4, we've done it with 2, we've done it with 6. At the moment, we're again doing it with 4. The initial experiments were 4-fold. The first 2, one was to take the pH of water, which measures the acid-alkaline balance of water, which you can do by adding chemicals. We did it without adding any chemicals, but we imprinted first to increase the pH by 1 full pH unit. 1 full pH unit is a factor of 10 of hydrogen ion concentration, so pretty significant. if it was the human blood in your body, half a pH unit up or half a pH unit down, you'd be dead on both ends. So 1 pH unit is a lot for a biological system. At the moment, because of the CO2 concentration increasing in the air due to global warming and such, that is starting to eliminate the shells of oysters. It's starting to eliminate coral reefs. So again, small changes in pH can have a big effect. So the first experiment was to increase the pH by 1 full pH unit with no chemical additions. We were robustly successful in doing that. And taking the same starting water, the second experiment was to decrease the pH of that water by 1 full pH unit. We were robustly successful in that. And we have been able to do it with very alkaline water, very acidic water. So just to let you know that it's can come across all kinds of water. It's possible to intend for the acid-alkaline balance to change. So it was a big deal to be able to get these two, take water, pure water, and raise the pH, decrease the pH. Not limited to 1 pH unit. We've done it 2 or 3 pH units, etc. The third experiment was to take a liver enzyme called alkaline phosphatase, and we first conditioned the space to a higher level of reality, physical reality. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we just exposed the liver enzyme to that space for 30 minutes, and we were able to increase its chemical activity by about 30%. Very big and very significant effect. The fourth was a living system. We took fruit fly larvae, and the intention was to increase the energy storage molecule in the fruit fly larva relative to the chemical precursor, and that's means the ATP ratio to the ADP ratio in the cells of fruit fly larvae. What this means is to go from ADP, which has 2 phosphorus molecules, to ATP, our basic energy storage system, and that is an increase of 1 pH units, 1 phosphorus unit. So we go from 2 phosphorus to 3 phosphorus, and we were successful with doing that. And we found that we could increase the ATP to ADP ratio by about 10 to 15% with p-values better than 0.001. What that means is the chance that this occurred by random events was less than 1 part in 1,000. And our belief system was that if we did this, then the larvae would be more physically fit, and so the transit time to the adult fly stage, which is usually 28 days, could be significantly reduced because the larvae were more fit. And we found that when we were able to increase the ATP to ADP ratio by about 10 to 15%, we were able to reduce the larval development time to the adult fly stage at about 25%, which is a very significant factor which propagates in the genes, so that subsequent progeny would have instead of 28 days, it was more like 22, 23 days for the larvae to become adult. So it said that you could manipulate this aspect in a living system. So these 4 experiments, again, p-value is better than 0.001 when we measured those kinds of things. So this is very significant. It showed that in today's world, that the Descartes assumption is totally in error. Humans can do that under the right set of conditions. So that was a very successful thing. And then we decided we would look at what has happened to the space itself. Did anything happen in the space? And we found that there were 4 significant changes. One, we began to see if we put a DC magnetic field, like a disc-shaped magnet, under the jar where we're measuring the pH of water with a pH electrode system. We found that with the South Pole pointing into the water, the pH became more alkaline in the water. And if we just turned it over, then within about, in general, it took the order of 2 or 3 days, the pH became, when the North Pole was pointing in the water, the pH became more alkaline. So that was very significant, because that cannot happen in our normal reality. In our normal reality, it's mainly electric charge and electric currents, and as the current flows in the system, it induces a magnetic field. But that magnetic field was always of a dipolar nature. That means a plus and a minus, or north and a south for the for the magnetic field. So this is a characteristic of all the physical substances in our distance-time world. In that particular world, we have individual electric charges, plus and minus, and we have electric currents, plus flowing in one direction, minus flowing in the other, driven by an electric field. But as far as the magnetic character, there's only magnetic dipoles. You do not have you do not have magnetic monopoles at our normal level of reality. So that was a very important effect. And we then found, because we assumed that if you get a DC magnetic field effect, then you have altered the physical nature of reality. You've been able to access magnetic monopoles. And we found that if we took a long bar magnet and put it within about a centimeter of the skin, which are a target point, acupuncture points, then we found that if the North Pole is pointing towards those points, then if you stick your arm out and just test its strength of trying to hold it as much as you can, that North Pole, the arm is very weak. If you turn that bar magnet around so the South Pole is pointing towards that set of points, now you can't even push that arm down. It becomes remarkably strong. So it says that within the human body there is this system which is at a higher level of physical reality. And this turns out to be the acupuncture meridian system, which is in this second layer of the inner layer of the bio-body suit. We know experimentally that we see no histological evidence of the acupuncture meridians, but we do see an induced electric effect when we make measurements near the acupuncture meridians and the acupuncture points. So it says, that piece of experimental data says that the acupuncture meridians and their points are somehow real, but they're not at the same level of our normal cells in our body. So that was also an important result. We also found that when we've already conditioned space to what we thought was a higher level of reality, that in fact anything we measured, temperature of the air, temperature of the water, pH, electrical conductivity, these property measurements all oscillated. Now, we know about oscillations in our normal distance-time world, but they're all many hertz, kilohertz, megahertz, gigahertz, terahertz. These are going up by factors of 1,000, each of those words. Well, it turns out in these oscillations, they were a 10th hertz, a 100th of a hertz, a 1,000th of a hertz, a 1,000,000th of a hertz, which you never see in our normal reality. They are part of this space conditioning. We also see, when we make measurements, that lifted space is much more coherent than in our normal reality. there's a lot of noise in our normal reality. When I say noise, I mean frequency effects that are chaotic. For example, if you take a normal light bulb, let's say 100 watts, all right, if you could, the reason it's not more is because of what's called destructive interference of the light photons coming out of the light bulb. If you took the same number of photons coming out of the light bulb per unit time, and you could cohere them so that they all rode on each other's back, then the energy density coming out of that light bulb would be something like 100 times the surface of the sun. And it's because you've made it coherent. You've made it like a laser. People are very familiar with lasers. So that's a part of incoherent light versus coherent light. And so what I'm saying is when you lift the gauge symmetry state to this higher level of reality through your intention and your meditation about that, then the character of that space changes. And that's really why we're able then to change the properties of material. The thing that we do is we condition the space. And it is the space that's being conditioned that causes the changes in the properties of materials, because that's in our intention statement. We have learned how to broadcast this over long distances, and that's in essence what we've done with the first autism intention experiment that is in operation right now with 44 parents and 44 children. All around the world, we've learned that in fact we broadcast this, so we condition their space tens of thousands, 15,000 miles away, almost in an instant. And that space, that conditioning of the space, which we do by putting the names and addresses, continuously scrolling through a computer in one of our conditioned spaces, that is transferred then to a person's home, because we just use their name and address, and the people in that home, the names and addresses are generally the operational parent relative to the child. In the first experiment, it was all of the children had been diagnosed as autistic. We have expanded that to children who exhibit characteristics that appear to be like autism without them having to go through this several year-long process to get labeled. Let's just put it that way. So it's the same kind of process will occur. It'll be that the space, their living space, anywhere in the world, so it seems, will get conditioned in this particular way, and the conditioning of that space will be transferred first to the named people, the parent, particular parent, wife or husband, or female or male, and to the named child. Other autistic children that would be in that same space, they will also get the benefit, not quite as much as the one named, but it's because the space is conditioned, and anybody living in that space will get the benefits of that conditioning.
Bill, can I share some of the results that we've had a little bit?
Yes, perfect timing.
Yeah, I think that, it's one thing, to hear about the space being conditioned, and for those of you who have not seen on the website page that you all have been accessing about this information, there is a video that is a video that Bill and I, it's an interview that Bill and I did. You get to hear some of the information about what's been going on for families. But really, from my vantage point, especially with my background as a speech-language pathologist, in pretty traditional kinds of treatments and modalities. If you have a child who is diagnosed with autism or, and or is nonverbal, what you'll hear in the mainstream or in the medical model, the educational model, is that if that child is not verbally communicating by the age of, say, even 5, 3 even, that there's really not going to be a whole lot of movement forward after that point. And definitely if the child's not communicating by 7, that you've got some real challenges. They'll tell you at that point you're supposed to be looking into alternative forms of communication and things like that. So one of the things that surprised and delighted me, quite frankly, at the very beginning of this process is some of the first things that we heard back was they were about communication. And I had even said to everybody, with my background as it is, that communication would probably be the last thing that showed up. And yet we had situations where we had children living in Australia who were, 3 years old and had never communicated before, deciding that on that particular day in that conditioned space, they were going to not only speak, but they were going to, kind of produce 20 new words.
In one day.
In one day, right. And we also had children, again, if you look at the age brackets of children and how they develop communication, again, after, 0 to 7 pivotal years, and yet we also had people that were contacting us saying, my child's 12 and went from minimal communication to coherent sentences, or my child is still nonverbal, but all of a sudden is using augmentative types of communication and is letting us know just how much is in there, how much was available that we didn't even know that this child knew about. So it was kind of one scenario like that after another as far as the communication piece. And this was showing up typically within, in some cases within that first month, but it definitely became the norm and the trend, over the first 3 to 4 months of that particular experiment. And it was just fascinating to watch. Secondary to that really was information from parents saying that their child was much more present to the physical environment. We had a few children who are by age not children, they're in their 20s or 30s even, and have augmentative forms of communication so that they were able to let us know one way or another what they were consciously experiencing. And that information also came back in a very interesting way. They were noticing what it was to be more present in the physical environment. One young woman talked about being able to feel, experience texture, to be able to actually be with the experience in the physical, and being able to, communicate that to us. So all kinds of very interesting things took place, very quickly. And I think we also have, I know Julie is on the call today as well. Julie's been participating since last December in the first cycle. And so I'd love to, one thing to hear it from me, but I think it's another thing to hear it, what's been going on for an individual parent. So Julie, if you're there, could you kind of share a little bit about your experience with us?
Okay. So I've had a really good, wonderful experience. My entire family, it was interesting because you go in thinking that it's, focused on just your child, the child you have registered with it. And it actually, as a whole family, has really evolved us. I know that I don't want to talk too much about before the experiment, but I think, Suzy, it's important if you don't mind me saying that, I went in knowing the power of intention, and I've had experiences in the past where I realized that my child was mirroring me a lot. And what I mean is my thoughts, my state of mind, my fear, my worries, all those low vibrational type of thoughts, he was absolutely reflecting. So I didn't get that for years. And then finally, in a moment where I just was at rock bottom, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And then I told my husband, I'm done thinking of all the bad, and I decided just to love him and to see what he was, what I knew about him that others maybe couldn't see, but what I knew intuitively about my son. And that's when I realized that he was blossoming. This was before the experiment, but I did see the connection of my thoughts. So that started it, and I mention that only because it really is what led me to Suzy, and maybe several of you guys as well, was the power of my thoughts and this knowing I had about my child. You know, when I went to observe him at school, and he was, he wasn't doing well there, and talking to the teachers, that knowing I had inside that, something wasn't, they weren't getting who he really was. So anyways, I wanted to mention that because I knew before going in, and I think that's partly why, we've had such great experiences through this experiment, was my belief in it. I really didn't have an ounce of doubt, and it took me a while to get there, but I to this day, I still, if not more, just believe so much in the power of intention. So you can imagine when I came across this experiment, it was just dropped from heaven, really, because it was everything I intuitively, what I knew, So I really connected with Suzy and her interview that I saw of her. And my son, it was funny, when I saw the video, he kind of sat on my lap and he just looked at me and he gave me this big smile and hugged and kissed me. And there was something, something that transmitted between the both of us, where he was just so happy I found Suzy, or knew I was going to get to Suzy at one point on my journey, and just celebrating that I finally connected got to that vibration where I was able to watch your video. But so going in on the experiment, I was, yes, I believe in this. And immediately when the experiment took off, I was just astounded because my son, he was verbal, but really not, he just kind of didn't want to interact that much. He just kind of did his own thing. He would use his words mostly for requesting things, and that was it. But, not huge sentences, not conversational at all. And, it seems as though we have come so far in so little time, because he comes up and he tells me things now, speaks in longer, pretty nice conversation skills, where he tells me about things, and that's where we are now. I see in the experiment is the conversation skills are becoming more complex little by little, and this is really, really exciting for me, because I just want to have a conversation with my son, and now he's more. He comes up and he shows me things, and he asks me, it's still, a lot of it is still like, can I have this? And, can you buy this for me? But I don't waste one moment. I am grateful for whatever type of communication it is, because, it's just so amazing. I just remember days thinking back how I would say to myself, boy, I just wish he would, point to a bird and say, look, Mommy, a bird. That's where I was, a couple years ago, thinking, geez, I would be the happiest mom if I could just hear him, point out something, or come show me something. And now here we are, where we're way beyond that. We're so way beyond that. And I get goosebumps right now talking about it, because this has been my life. I threw my hands up, and to the greater power, to God, to Source, whoever, you addressed, there's definitely a higher power in my mind. I said, show me the way. Show me. I promise this will be my life. I will play this role. I will help others. I will tell my story. Just show me the way, because I know there's something here. Well, my son has shown me that. He's just an amazing, amazing soul that has taught myself and my family so many things. I mean, now I see it's such a blessing. And where we have come, the more I grow, the more he shows what he's capable of. What I'm trying to say is I feel like I strongly feel like all these children really are placed in our lives to evolve us. So when I say I went into the experiment focusing on my son, I noticed that I was evolving in so many ways, and my son was reflecting this, so very neat stuff going on at my house. So lots of conversations, the explosion of words, playfulness. That's one thing I got to mention, his sense of humor. I mean, this boy is he's a little character. Like, he'll just play these little tricks on us. And just so you know, a couple of years ago, we were dealing with a boy who was so sensitive to the energy we were giving out, which was all fear and worry, that he will come downstairs in the morning, hide under a blanket, and you would just hear him grunting under the blanket. And I tell him, come say hi to Baba, his father, he calls Baba. Come say hi to Baba, and he wouldn't go near him. He wouldn't go, and he just was so uncomfortable in the space, like Dr. Tiller was saying, that he just found a little corner and hid under a blanket. And I was focusing on what's wrong with him, when it was everything to do what was going on with my vibration. So it was just amazing, because I didn't see it that way back then. But that's what, he would just feel so uncomfortable. He just he was going inward. Then he would go to school, and he would go even more inward because so that was my story. But amazing, just amazing. And every day I have to say, I have a moment where I'm very grateful. I'm so grateful for Suzy and Dr. Tiller, and just for the path that has led me to where I am, because, just not a moment. The good thing about it is sometimes we think in life, why? And then when you get to the point where you're like, thank you, where like you see that you had this, it was such a blessing, where others, I say all the time, when my son comes up to me and says, look, Mommy, look what I did, or something like that, and I get chills throughout my whole body, and I give him this big hug, and maybe the parent next to me wouldn't get so excited, like if I'm at a park or something. I just cherish that. So many things we take for granted, and that's a huge lesson in itself. Like, every little thing, but if they're huge things to me, I just cherish it because of the journey I've been on and what my son has taught me and my entire family. So we are very excited, and we see so many beautiful moments in his expressing of himself and growing. And it's very exciting to see him freely express himself. And I kind of chuckle when I overhear him playing, and he says things like, wait a minute, that's not how it goes. Like something that before, that wouldn't flow out. You know what I mean, Suzy? Like, it wouldn't, like, being a speech and language. It would have just, the thing that's really another thing I mentioned since the experiment is, I feel like there's no, like, before I felt like it was choked up, like his words were very forceful, like he had to really, like, push them out. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but, like, really had to work to get them out. And the fluidity in his speech is just amazing, just amazing. It just flows out. And the other thing, and I know I'm talking kind of long, I can talk for hours on this, so I'll stop after this, but the other thing was his temper. He is just so much more peaceful, just such a peacefulness about him. Like, he used to have these terrible temper tantrums, but they're very few and far between, I got to be honest, They're very few and far between. So that's another huge blessing, because we really, going out with my son, it used to be treading on thin ice, you know, you never knew, you know, but now it just seems like, you know, it's very few and far between, and that is just as equal of a blessing. So, but that's a little bit of my story.
Makes the heart nice and warm for sure, Julie.
Oh, it sure does.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Mine
Lots
too.
of warm feelings. Lots of warm feelings.
And I think one of the things that I want to add here too is, for those of you who are listening on the call or will be listening to this recording, is, you know, you might be saying, well, Julie came in with this, you know, wonderful attitude and those kinds of things. But one of the things that Bill and I were very clear about from the beginning of this is that helping the participants, especially the parents, understand, you know, kind of what's taking place here, helping them kind of maintain that attention point within this process, like Julie was kind of talking about, so that you really do get the most out of the space that's created. So what we've done within the process is we've implemented a once-a-month teleseminar, so that Bill and I can get on the calls with you all and provide information, let you know some of the things that we're noticing, maybe point in certain directions for things that you might be able to pay attention to, all for the very purpose of really getting the most out of the space that's being created. So, Bill, did you want to add anything about that particular piece, and then I'll let people know what the steps are?
I do want to add for these folks that we've gathered data on the parents and on the children, and once a month, and in particular the children, there are 77 questions that are answered by the parents each month. It's easy to do, and we have plotted the change in the question characteristic at a 6-month level. So there's data, we can see the changes in the growth of that. And I have gathered that data, and we'll be putting it in a form of a paper, what I call my white papers. Like there were 29 white papers that are free for people to access on my website, www.tiller.org. And now there is number 30, which is the 6 months trend data results from these 44 children. And that will go up on the website. Probably it'll take about a week to make the changes that I've given to the guys in my lab to do. So any one of you can, if you can be patient for a week, you can see these trend lines, and looking at them, just absolutely remarkable, these various effects for these 77 questions. We will eventually, we're gathering now statistical information, and those results are just remarkable. For a group of 14 of the 44 who answered all the questions, that data is now available to us, and we see the effect size. The p-values are better than 3 zeros, 4 zeros followed by a 1. So, no, 3 zeros followed by a 1. That means 1 chance in 10,000 that these results could have occurred by random chance. So that I won't be putting up that particular data, the statistical data. That will be important to eventually publish in medical journals and such. But I think the trend data is very important for all of you folks to see the trends and how they've changed over time, month by month. As I say, that'll be available for you to access in about a week, hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to talk to you, too, about some of the other steps in this process, and then we can open this up for some questions, and we can kind of go from there. Everybody that participates in the Autism Healing Intention program will be filling out a couple different forms, and they'll be filling those out on a monthly basis. So the way we're keeping track of all of this is through something called an ATEC, which is the Autism Treatment Evaluation Checklist, and the ZUNG, which is it's a depression and anxiety, or it's a depression scale. It's a self-rating scale for depression. So what we've been asking parents to do is we've been asking them to fill out the ATEC and the ZUNG on a monthly basis. When you register for this process, you will receive links to these forms, and we ask that you fill out a baseline first. We also ask that you fill out a consent form. All of this is done via email. It's all very easy to do at this point because everything's a link. You can do it on your phone, those kinds of things. And what happens is that you'll get those initial ATEC and ZUNGs as well as the consent form. Every month after that, you will be sent a reminder that your ATEC and ZUNG is due by the 5th of each month. And as you input that information, it goes right into our database. So it's not, it's not open for outside interpretation or those kinds of things. I do look at the information as far as the anecdotal information that you provide, so that when we are on those telecalls with you on a monthly basis, we can provide you some of the information regarding the trends. We can notice what we notice from our vantage point and hopefully point in a certain direction. So that is the amount of paperwork that's required is really pretty minimal, and both the ZUNG and the ATEC together are probably going to take you maybe 10, 15 minutes to fill out. So that works really kind of beautifully at this point.
Suzy, can I add one important thing? Mm-hmm. And that is that this kind of feedback often tells us, with continued probing, how we might need to alter the imprint statement to correct something that is slowing things down as far as progress is concerned. We have found that we're learning a lot from the feedback from the parents in the first experiment. The kids were doing remarkably well. We found that parents needed more juice. We just call it juice. And so we were able then to change that in the imprint statement to provide what the parents needed in order that they could keep up with the evolutionary process of their child.
Right. Like Bill was saying, not only does that information help us make significant changes in the re-imprinting, which we do every 3 months as necessary, but we also, again, being able to have conversations about these trends with you on a month-to-month basis really allows you to get the most out of the process as well. So the ATEC and the ZUNG, the consent form, and then the ATEC and the ZUNG being sent in on a monthly basis. Participation in the telecalls is not necessarily mandatory, but I will say extremely helpful.
Beneficial all around.
Yeah, beneficial all the way around. We also have a Facebook community page, and again, not mandatory, but beneficial all the way around as well, because what we noticed is that people who are participating in this process in a community and in the safety of a community that, are kind of co-creating in this experience, that those individuals were really across the board just having a much easier, more fluid time, greater results across the board within that original 44 as well.
They seem to be evolving faster than the others.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference to really participate in that way. The Facebook pages also, allow you to kind of share what's going on in your family experience, for the support of other people. And also, if things are challenging, the support there as well.
Can I add one other thing?
Sure.
A state of mind that is important is to look at this as an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
You parents are participating not only in the transformation of our world, but transformation in the relationship you have with this other soul that is coming into this particular classroom. So I know it's difficult, but it can be fun if you can adopt the adventure perspective.
Right. The other benefit of a group is that, with that group consciousness, much easier to create changes. And one of the other things that we noticed that was really pretty early on that was fascinating was that somebody would come on to the Facebook group and they would post, maybe an issue or a challenge or something like that. And you would see all of this information come in, and within, just a matter of, a few days' time, all of a sudden that same person would be posting something on the Facebook page indicating that that particular issue had been completely resolved. And then there was conversation about the resolution of that. And, what it really showed me is this collective consciousness working together, all having the same conditioned space, helping each other fluidly move in that space and learn in that space. So the combination between the collective group support, the information that Bill and I may be able to provide on that month-to-month basis as well, and then the information that you all give us through those ATEC and Zungs really creates, I like to say, a possibility and potential that becomes a probability. It's the probability for change becomes really pretty significant for positive change.
Part of the adventure aspect of this contribution that comes back is that it will work its way into scientific publications that can affect the stuckness and misunderstanding of the orthodox science and medical community. So the parents and children are co-creators in this transformation on a much larger scale than just one family.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to be able to open this up for questions, if you have any. And before I do that, I just want to say that very generally speaking, that the intention for the children is that they be able to integrate into their bio-body suits, into this time-space reality, again, according to their soul's purpose. And the intention that is broadcast to the parent is very generally that they begin to release and reduce the stress related to parenting a child that is diagnosed with autism and or has those kinds of characteristics, because we know on a very functional basis, practical basis, that can be a real challenge. And we've also learned from the kids over this last process that it is in fact a challenge, and that the more support that we can give the parents in the reduction of that stress, the more fluid this whole process is of integration for the children. So that gives you a general idea of what's being focused on here. And having said that, just open it up for questions. If you have a question for Dr. Tiller or myself, if you'll push *6, it'll unmute your phone and just address it as you'd like.
Hi, it's Lori.
Hello, Lori.
Hi, Marie.
Hello. Lori, yeah. Dr. Tiller, I'm very curious about this little black box from Radio Shack or wherever.
Well, yes, okay.
What is it?
Well, as I say, it's a circuit board with an electrical circuit in it. If you go to my website, tiller.org, to white paper number 2, you can see a circuit diagram and such. Now, the dilemma will be if you have a friend who's a good electrical engineer, they would look at that circuit diagram and say it can't possibly work in distance time. And that part is correct. It is not meant to work in distance time, but it does work in a higher domain aspect of the universe. And if I correct that present circuit so that it works in distance time, then I can no longer imprint that circuit. Isn't that interesting?
It's not the box. Yeah.
Well, it is the box. The box is a kind of an interface that allows our connection to another domain of reality beyond distance time. That's what conditions the space. Brilliant. And the space is your home.
Yeah.
So it's just using it. Is it just using it as a vehicle for an electrical current that you then?
Yeah, it's something that can be understood that way. It therefore is useful in a scientific sense. But the ultimate aspect of our evolution is that these things are just training wheels to help us get going, so that we ultimately will do it all ourselves with our own intentions. Everybody has this capability. Ultimately. You have to work for it, of course.
Is this kind of, would you use the analogy of using this box perhaps to substitute a human ability to sit and meditate for however many times a day on a particular intention?
In an aspect, yes. Not perfectly clearly so. If you connect with higher consciousness in the unseen, these consciousness will say, we will not do it for you, but we will help you. And so you can get help if you ask. And so it's that kind of thing. If you do everything for someone, then ultimately you destroy their growth. So the people, we're here in, I like to think of it this way. To me, we're all spirits having a physical experience as we ride the river of life together. Our spiritual parents dressed us in these body suits, put us in this playpen that we call a cosmos in order to grow in coherence and in order to develop our gifts of intentionality so that we can ultimately become what we are intended to become, which is co-creators with our spiritual parents. And when I say that, co-creators at that level, that's really a very big time level, okay? So that's way down the road for all of us. But in essence, we have this inner layer of the bio-body suits that is the acupuncture meridian system. And so our intentions that we hold for ourselves can be functionally effective in our own bodies, to change our own bodies, to change our own behaviors. So we become more and more and more as we do these things. The particular vehicle, in this case, is just a broadcast. And so you don't need a device in your home. Later on, for particular purposes, you may want to play with those things. And so on my website, they're available. The unimprinted version is available for sale, so that so you can play, you can learn, and you could try to do what we do for you. So all of this is meant for you folks to become more than you presently are, and in the process connect very meaningfully with this new young soul that is not necessarily young soul, but new soul that has come into your household. And enjoy the fruits of it, and enjoy looking at what's happening to you. So it's a process of aiding the evolution. And this device, this vehicle, is a means to that end. Am I being clear enough?
Beautifully so. Sign me up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, it's Leah.
Yes.
And I have a question for you, Suzy.
Uh-huh.
My son has been diagnosed with autism and ADHD since he was 3. And I've been trying to get him to stop steaming with, he has infatuation with like plastic bottles, anything plastic. And he'll just like bang for like hours. Is there anything that I could do to shift it? Is it me with my frequency, or just him trying to say, hey, I don't like plastic bottles, get him out the house?
Right. Well, this probably isn't the place for that conversation. I can have that with you definitely via email. But number one, let me give you a couple pointers here. One thing is that it's never what it appears to be. So
Okay.
When children stim on whatever they stim on for whatever reason, they usually are providing you with a piece of information about that particular product or about that particular piece of information, and that will be very different for each child. That really comes along with kind of knowing the kinds of information that your individual child can provide for you. What I will say is, as your space is conditioned, as you participate in something like this Autism Healing Intention program, what you will notice personally is this ability to kind of be more tuned in to what those things are. So yes, you can absolutely, schedule a session with me, and I can give you insights and information about what he's attempting to share with you. And more importantly, you also can begin to live in a space that begins to allow that to be evoked within you, so that emerges within you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because quite frankly, it is very individualized. I've watched several children stim in very similar ways, and they're trying to say different things. So that's why it's a little challenging to respond to that, at least right here.
Sense.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next.
Dr. Tiller, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I wondered if you were familiar with Rudolf Steiner's conception of the etheric body and the astral body of basically 4 levels. How would you contrast what you've just described, where basically
what I've described is it's basically 2 spaces. We have distance time is space-time, okay? That's the outermost level of the bio-body suit. The inner level of the bio-body suit is the old etheric. I use the word old etheric because that's what it used to be called. We understand more now, and I use a different word. I call it reciprocal space. The mathematics is of a domain which is not distance or time, but is basically a total frequency domain. 3 of them spatial frequencies and 1 a temporal frequency. And that's where the reciprocal aspect comes in, But we need a coupler, and the coupler, which I call deltron, is one that can go faster than light or slower than light. It's outside of distance-time and therefore doesn't suffer the issues of relativity theory. So that coupler then allows this to become a duplex space. And if you want to, since we're looking at it from distance-time, and it basically goes faster than the velocity of light, it would be mathematically imaginary from direct space. So when you want ultimately to plot the data, then you have to look at mathematically complex functions, that is, that have real and imaginary parts. So it starts getting a little sticky about here. Does that help?
It does. Can you say any more about a coupler?
Yeah, I think the thing is, it is something I had to invent in order to explain the phenomena that we were seeing. I could not explain it at all based upon just distance-time. It violates distance-time, and therefore orthodox science doesn't even want to look at the data. It's outside of their comfort zone. So, but I have, and if you look at my website, some of the free white papers deal with this mathematics, because you have to deal with a real and imaginary part, and in fact you have to get into a system made of vectors and tensors, and then it starts getting wonderfully complex. But that's the way the future will have to deal with this, as I see it at the moment. It's my working hypothesis, okay? I'm just crawling and walking, and sometimes I'm fortunate enough to be running, but it's all that kind of thing. It's just awakening within me, and my goal is to write it down and make it available for everybody, so that when the orthodox science community and the orthodox medicine community get off the pot and decide to give meaning to something outside of what they're comfortable with, then something is there for them to help them go forward. That's my goal.
Thank you.
One of the things that the kids have shared for a long time now is they've always said, we'll meet you in the space in between. Because when I was asking, what would really help for us to see you, for you to see us, for us to be able to co-create together those kinds of questions, it was always this, we'll meet you in the space in between. And when Bill began to discuss this coupling of these two spaces, everything in me knew that was the space in between. That was the space that these kids have been talking about. So.
Yeah. And in my modeling, the deltron comes from the emotion domain in nature, which is a part of the soul self. Mm-hmm. So that's part of what Suzy is saying is the space between. Mm-hmm. The details, you can imagine, I am trying to do experiments to ultimately prove some of these things that are my working hypotheses that come out of my intuition, planted in me, I suspect, by much higher intelligence than I have. And it's like any other science that you give meaning to. You often have to invent tools. You often have to invent concepts. So I see it as just an expansion of our orthodox science with the additional variables at the moment, one being intention and the other being consciousness. So these ultimately, I think, are meaningful aspects of our orthodox science, and any of you out there in the listening community who have studied a technical field and therefore used the science of distance-time, the science of distance time, of course, has been very, very good, but it's just not complete, not anywhere near complete. I think of ourselves in that regard as just babes crawling across the floor of the universe. And we have to greatly expand our concepts and our understanding and give meaning to it, and then ultimately make the tools that we need to understand it better. And we, as humans, have the capability of doing these things ultimately ourselves, which we become something that doesn't need any of these training wheels, but that's down the road for us. But Qigong masters, for example, these are the folks that have already captured the ability to do meaningful things with the acupuncture meridian system and their own intention, and be practical they can affect things from thousands of miles away. Well, now it appears we can do the same by broadcasting from our laboratory in Payson, Arizona to Australia or New Zealand or the furthest reaches of anywhere in the planet, it seems. So I'm learning. I've given meaning to a lot of these things in the past, and now data is flowing back to say, yeah, you are on a reasonable track, and now we're beginning to learn some precise things. So it's all good to me.
Very good. Yeah. So any other questions before we call this a call? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for taking the time and your interest, and we look forward to having your participation in the program. And again, I'll be sending out this recording here within the next 24 hours, so listen to it again. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to drop us an email, and we can kind of go from there.